Chapter 81. They told me that when I walk on the mountain, I need to keep my knees straight. I was told that if I wanted to get some water to drink, I needed to ask them for permission first. Ah, fuck. They're acting so cheap and dirty. The second-class disciples tormented the third-class disciples in any way they could imagine. Every time they trained, they would nitpick the tiniest details and make all sorts of new rules to torment them. Today, even though their boarding house was clean, the second-class disciples demanded they clean it until not a speck of dust could be found. I'd rather take a beating, Jogul grunted. He was someone accustomed to bullying others with his fists, so he couldn't get used to this kind of abuse. I never imagined that the second-class disciples were such people. I respected them. We aren't in some neighborhood brawl. Are their actions even acceptable? Yunjong sighed. There's nothing that says they can't do this. There was no doubt that the second-class disciples were harassing them. The malice and ridicule being directed at the third-class disciple were evident. Despite that, their actions couldn't be criticized. In the first place, everything that the second-class disciples demanded of the third-class disciples were rules and norms set forth by Mount Hua. Then what was the problem? Because such rules were established at least 200 years ago. Inherently, old rules were modified and changed according to the current times. But Mount Hua never did that. Therefore, it was decided that the sect would pick and choose which rules to follow according to the times while ignoring the ones that were out of date. However, the second-class disciples used such archaic rules to attack and control the third-class disciples. Leaving everything else aside, the biggest problem was that there were common rules which gave the older ones the power to rule. No, they said Mount Hua's disciples should never let go of their sword. Do they want us to hold our swords even when we're bathing or doing laundry? What about when we use the bathroom? I was told to hold it in hand even when I eat, and hold it while sleeping. What nonsense is that? Are we supposed to memorize every rule our ancestors came up with throughout all of Mount Hua's history? They don't even know all of them. That's what I'm saying. The third-class disciples gnashed their teeth. It felt as if their nerves were going to split in anger because of this absurd abuse of power, like their lives were shortening each time the second-class disciples approached them. I can't even eat or sleep properly. They gather us just because they're bored, and they blame everyone and swear at us, even if only one person made a mistake. What the hell are they trying to achieve? Can't we do something about this? Yunjong sighed. What can we do? Isn't this a bit harsh? To be honest, they aren't even hiding that they're bullying us. They're clearly crossing the line. Right, I can tolerate anything else, but I can't stand them disturbing our training time. Anyway, this is a martial arts sect. How can they dare to interfere with our practice? The third-class disciples had bloodshot eyes. Actually, until now, the second and third-class disciples had no reason to fight. The second-class disciples were too busy with their own training, and the third-class disciples were learned from Ungom in the White Plum Blossom dorms. They had very little interaction with each other. Still, before all of this happened, the third-class disciples felt a sense of admiration and longing toward the second-class disciples. But now that the seniors turned against their juniors like this, they were feeling an indescribable sense of betrayal. Yunjong turned his head to the culprit behind this. He looked at Chung Myung, who was leaning on a chair, and said, Chung Myung, huh? Shouldn't we do something? About? Sasuks, the Sasuks! Yunjong deeply sighed. Everyone was yelling and cursing until now, but Chung Myung didn't register a word of what was happening. Right now, the second-class disciples wanted the third-class disciples to bow before them, especially Chung Myung. Despite this being a boring way to get that done, but Yunjong could understand the second-class disciples in his own way. In fact, it wasn't the second-class disciples that were wrong for feeling disrespected by Chung Myung, but the path they chose to get them to submit was wrong. To be precise, the path wasn't entirely wrong, but the way they were acting was. Even if Yunjong was a second-class disciple, he would have a hard time tolerating a person like Chung Myung. So far, there have been no problems with elders and the first-class disciples. This was because Chung Myung never crossed the line when dealing with them. It was unknown what was going on in Chung Myung's mind, but he would always show respect to the adults within the sect. But the Baek disciples were different. Didn't Yunjong already see for himself how Chung Myung spoke with the Baek disciples? Isn't it obvious what they want? Obvious? Yunjong sighed. I won't tell you to change your personality or bow to them. Just try backing down and comply for a bit. Comply? Yunjong's eyes trembled at the way Chung Myung said it. Shit. He chose the wrong word. However, contrary to Yunjong's expectations, Chung Myung didn't throw a fit. Rather, he looked at Yunjong with bright eyes and spoke with creepy cheerfulness. Sahyun! Sahyun! Huh? I think I know a better way to solve this. With this method, I can really solve everything. Seeing Chung Myung's face bright with excitement, Yunjong felt anxiousness sink into him. But he couldn't avoid asking, what method is that? Do you need to ask? I'm going to destroy those Sasuk bastards. As soon as Chung Myung answered, he got up from his seat and Yunjong desperately yelled, Catch him! Catch that madman! If we don't catch him, we all die! Get him! Perhaps the others felt the same anxiousness, but all the Sahyungs ran in prepared to catch him at once. While they all held onto Chung Myung's limbs and pulled him back, Jogul jumped up and crushed Chung Myung's body to the floor. Ah! Don't let him go. Never let go. Let go? Aren't you going to let go? The third-class disciples clung to him like dogs holding on to food. In their desperate eyes, there was only one thing going on. Don't let this mad dog loose outside of the boarding house. Chung Myung, calm down. Chung Myung. I will smash them all. There are rules to seniority in the sect. If you ignore that, you will be excommunicated if you beat the seniors. Chung Myung's eyes lit up. Fine. I won't smash them completely. I won't. I'll just hit one person. Just one. I'm telling you. That's still fighting someone from a level higher than us, you idiot. Ugh. Just hold him tight. Ugh. How can this bastard be this strong? Ugh. Chung Myung grunted through his teeth. Those bastards are doing things that we didn't even do 100 years ago. I'll just teach them a short lesson. A Taoist home needs to be pure and natural. In other words, it is a place unbound from norms and classes created by society. Wasn't there a famous story of how Confucius came to greet Lao Tzu and he said not to do such things? However, the disciples of such a sect were doing such things. Calm down, Chung Myung. We will be in huge trouble if you beat the Sasuks. All the things you did till now won't matter anymore. Stay still, will you? Let go. Let go of me. The third-class disciples all built a giant human tower and pressed Chung Myung to the ground. Yet each time he wriggled, the massive tower reeled. Seeing that, Yunjong broke out in a cold sweat. No, does this even make any sense? Baekchun is the strongest of the second-class disciples. Until Chung Myung arrived, Baekchun naturally stood first among the disciples. Everyone had no doubts that he would continue to be first for a long time and eventually become the greatest master within the sect. Jogul wasn't inferior to him, but learning martial arts like the second-class disciples would take time. It was virtually impossible for Jogul to catch up with Baekchun, who had already trained in martial arts for nearly a decade. Even if it was possible, it would take decades for it to happen. That was why the disciples were accepted with large age gaps. No matter how talented they were, it would take enough time to accumulate their skills. Therefore, the different disciples groups couldn't overcome one another easily. But what was happening in front of Yunjong now? The youngest of the third-class disciples, who only recently entered Mount Hua, was talking about destroying all the second-class disciples. The real problem is that no one here thinks it's impossible. What if it was thought about rationally? He couldn't understand. No matter how strong Chung Myung was, it was unlikely that he could win against Baekchun. Even if Chung Myung had learned martial arts since birth, Baekchun would still have more years of training under his belt. Moreover, Baekchun was not a man that lacked talent. It would be impossible to overcome such a difference. A person who could do such things would be a genius. However, even if Chung Myung was a genius, he couldn't overcome a 10-year age gap. If Yoonjong thought about it rationally, it was impossible for Chung Myung to defeat Baekchun. But the problem is that it still feels like Baekchun's Sasuk will get beaten quite a lot. In the first place, common sense and rationality didn't apply to Chung Myung. Has anything that this guy did till now made sense? Chung Myung, Yoonjong sighed and said, I understand how you feel, but not now. Why? The conference is coming soon. What about it? Baekchun Sahyung is the person who will represent the second-class disciples. What will happen if you beat him so badly that he can't participate? Come on, you don't think I'll beat him like that, do you? I just need to beat him so that it hurts without leaving any visible signs. That's my specialty. Don't you know? I know. Yoonjong knew very well because he had been hit like that countless times. But you can't do that. Baekchun Sahyung is our Sasuk. Will he be able to perform properly after having his confidence shattered like that? Let's hold on a little longer. It's better for us to be harassed by the Baek disciples than to be humiliated by the Jungnam sect. Chung Myung frowned. I still think it would be better to just hit him. Just this once. I'm asking you to let this go. Please. The conference is a huge deal for us. Please. Chung Myung turned his head and spoke in a dull voice. Move now. The Sahyungs looked at Yoonjong, and when he nodded, they very slowly let go of Chung Myung and moved to the side. Still, they stayed close enough to be able to catch him if he suddenly ran. Then we need to just wait until the conference is over, right? Don't have to wait till then, but what is with you? Say clearly. Yoonjong tightly closed his eyes and spoke as if he was quelling a raging fire. Yes, only till the conference. Okay. Chung Myung nodded his head. This is something the great Sahyung requested, so I have to listen. Thank you so much. Why are you crying? No, nothing. These aren't tears. It's the sweat from my heart, you bastard. But what should I do if they come to me for a fight? Would that even happen? Just, what if? Yoonjong sighed. Then you can handle it however you want. I wouldn't know what to do if that happened anyways. Really? The corners of Chung Myung's mouth curled into a devilish grin, and seeing that smile, Yoonjong's heart suddenly felt 100 times more uncomfortable. Chapter 82. How was it? Surprisingly, there was no reaction. Is that so? Baek-sang looked into Baek-chun's eyes and answered, Yes, it didn't seem like they were angry enough to lash out. He hasn't even said anything that we could use to cause problems with them. Really? Baek-chun narrowed his eyes. This is a little different from what I expected. Isn't he at a rebellious age? Baek-chun thought that if he scratched the third-class disciples a little, they'd immediately revolt against them, and this was what he aimed for. Mount Hua is a prestigious sect. There are only 2 sins considered to be utterly taboo within the sect. One was to never touch the demonic arts, and the other was to usurp their seniors. These 2 actions are the most heavily punished crimes. The former is related to Mount Hua's identity as a righteous sect, while the latter is a matter of challenging the history, traditions, and systems of Mount Hua. So Baek-chun planned to anger the third-class disciples and then use the sect's rules to tie them down so that they couldn't resist them any further. Surprisingly, the third-class disciples were tolerating their abuse well. Should we apply more pressure? It would be unreasonable to go beyond this. If we go any further, we may be faulted for causing the dispute. Baek-chun let out a low sigh as if he didn't like it. Then, is he not simply a hot-blooded idiot? Considering what he saw from Chung Myung at the dining hall, he seemed to be impatient and reckless. He was someone that didn't care about his reputation and even controlled the third-class disciples. Was this Yoonjong's doing? Whatever the case, it was certain that Baek-chun's plan was falling apart. What about the other third-class disciples? There's nothing, aside from the fact that they're doing some strange training. Baekchun gently tapped his cheek with his finger. I see. Sahyung, it's unreasonable to prolong this. We don't know when the Sasuks will grow displeased with our actions, and there isn't much time left until the conference, too. I know. Baekchun nodded his head. Now that it's boiled, it's time to scoop out the porridge. Then, at Baeksang's question, Baekchun smiled and spoke. As you know, the Chung disciples are good children. That's true. Before we left, they were all so naive and innocent. Yet, they've changed that much in a single year. It's because they got entangled with a problematic child. In fact, do we really need to punish all the children? The problem is Chung Myung alone. You're right. Baeksang agreed. The third-class disciple and their representative, Yoonjung, aren't difficult children to deal with. Jogul was a bit wild, but he was a child who Baekchun could handle. The problem is Chung Myung. Don't they say that people change according to their surroundings? The third-class disciples were fine before they became strange due to Chung Myung's influence. At least, the third-class disciples still showed respect to their superiors, and they knew that the words of their Sasuks were more important than words from their peers. It was none other than Chung Myung who corrupted them like this. In other words, if Chung Myung could be broken, then the third-class disciples would naturally become as docile and obedient as they used to be. What do you plan to do? Saje. Yes, Sahyung. Baekchun smiled. Do we need another way? What we are doing now is just obeying and enforcing the rules of Mount Hua. Isn't that right? That's true, Sahyung. There is no room for personal emotions to intervene. Isn't Chung Myung also a precious junior of Mount Hua? He might be a bit cheeky, but if we can use him well, he'll be a good resource. So I am just going to correct the mistakes the young child is making. Baekchun smiled. However, the problem is the method. I didn't want to use the rough method if possible, but I don't have enough time, so it is inevitable. The best way to discipline a child is through conversation, but occasionally, isn't it also necessary to reprimand them? Baeksang nodded his head as if he was excited. One day they will understand the meaning behind Sahyung's actions. Right, even if it might hurt a little now. The two looked at each other and smiled. Ki. The door to the White Plum Blossom boarding house opened. Peek. And then, a little head popped out. The man who peeked around frowned slightly. Nobody's here? Like a guest in the night, seeping through the darkness, Chung Myung glanced around with a sense of urgency. Nothing weird and no people around. Chung Myung sighed and stepped outside. Ugh! Just what was he doing? Leaving the dorms, he looked up at the sky with a despondent face. It appeared as if his soul was escaping. My Sahyung, are you watching? What his Sahyung loved most in the world was... What? Don't get annoyed already. Listen peacefully from the beginning and wait until I'm finished before getting angry. Be patient and listen. You were the sect leader of Mount Hua in the past. Chung Myung's face twisted. Anyway, I'm doing all this to avoid such an airheaded person. Does this make any sense? He spoke with a great deal of resentment, but unfortunately, there was no answer to be heard. And that's not all. There's that woman who never misses a chance to bother me. Then there's that other guy who looks like a parasite feeding on others, always coming around speaking about ancient rules of the sect that I've never even heard of, and targeting his junior disciples. I'd just rather die than to suffer these fools. Being patient wasn't in Chung Myung's nature. He really just wanted to flip everything upside down. These children were causing such a fuss, he even felt like he wanted to go and make the sect leader spank some sense into these kids. After what Chung Myung's been through, even if he ran straight to the Shaolin sect, they would willingly accept him as a disciple for his patience and diligence. What sin did I commit to deserve that? I've committed many sins in my previous life. To be honest, he couldn't do anything about it because of his conscience. Considering how much his Sahyung, who was the sect leader, had struggled to help him when he was a second-class disciple of Mount Hua, he couldn't say anything to the children now or their elders. Why did I act like that? Chung Myung's eyes turned wet. He should have acted in moderation. It seemed like the karma from his previous life was tormenting him now. He felt horrible as he tried to lead the little ones to grow into full adulthood. I guess this must be why Sahyung didn't get married in his previous life. He was afraid that he would end up having a child like me. Sorry, Sahyung. He had always thought that it was because his Sahyung lacked a pretty face, so he couldn't get married. Taking a deep breath, Chung Myung walked out of the sect grounds. In the past, there would have been a guard at the main gate, but the current Mount Hua didn't have many visitors, so there was no need for guards. And the reason was simple. Not so long ago, Mount Hua was a place where even beggars wouldn't come, so there was no need to place guards. It was Chung Myung who reinvigorated Mount Hua. But these ungrateful bastards, they didn't even thank him for bringing enough money for the sect to survive so long that they wouldn't run dry even if everyone turned old. He wanted to hit this guy and that guy. No, he wanted to beat everyone. It's impossible to do that either. It was weird, but these days, Yunjong's face seemed to constantly overlap with his Sahyung's face. It would be disrespectful to compare Yunjong's fair and handsome face to his Sahyung, who looked like a bandit. Their expressions were similar, though. Seeing Yunjong with a sour expression that looked like he was helpless and nervous each time Chung Myung did something. Strangely, I feel guilty. It was hard to ignore because it felt like his Sahyung was coming back to life and nagging at him. Chung Myung shook his head again. I just need to endure it until the end of the conference. Even Chung Myung wanted to teach the Jungnam bastards a lesson. No matter how annoyed he was with the Baek disciples, it could not compare to his hatred held towards the Jungnam sect. He only wanted to kick the asses of the Baek disciples, but he wanted to completely strangle all life from the Jungnam sect. As Yunjong said, it was best to wait until the conference passed. Right. Yeah, if I can't control my temper, more problems will come up. Until the conference ends, it would be best to avoid running into the Baek disciples. Chung Myung started climbing the mountain peak through a different path than usual. I won't go to that peak anymore. A person can be beaten twice, but not 3 times. If you fall for the same trick 3 times, are you even human? Chung Myung turned his head and looked at the peak he went to in the past. My God! Now I can't even train where I want to. Even now, the other sects and their disciples who have trained diligently for 100 years must be getting stronger. To close the gap between them, Chung Myung doesn't have time to spare resting. There's no point in being strong alone. In order for Mount Hua to stand tall among the 10 great sects, no, to go beyond that and to be able to reproduce their legend as the best swordsman in the world, the existence of a warrior who can subdue the ancient masters overlooking the other sects is essential. No matter how often he thought about it, in the current Mount Hua, Chung Myung was the only one who could play that role. Well, no one could ever know. 50 years, 100 years. If his goal was the sect's longevity, he might try helping Jogul or Yunjong. Although he was acting petty, Baekchun was also talented. It seemed like they could have potential as long as the foundation is established correctly. The problem was that Chung Myung wasn't the sort of person who could patiently wait around. I'll freeze to death if I need to wait for 50 years. Before that happens, he'll die. Chung Myung, who climbed to a new mountain peak, slowly drew his sword and glanced around. No one's here, right? Whether it was an accident or intentional, that woman had been following Chung Myung like a leech since that day. Although she was more well-behaved compared to the other Baek disciples, she would constantly pop up and annoy him when he was alone. That was enough for Chung Myung to try and avoid her. But strangely, even with Chung Myung's powerful senses, he still struggled to detect her presence until it was too late to avoid her. It's not like she's a ghost, so why? There are plenty of people who have a weak or vague presence, but Yu Yisol was especially unique even among such people. Moreover, Chung Myung is used to feeling the presence of people by their ki rather than with his eyes or ears. especially Chung Myung. Ah! And like this, Chung Myung jumped up and stepped back in panic. In his eyes, he looked at Yu Yi-sol, whose hand stretched out towards him. Come on, show up with a bit of flair at least. Announce yourself first. When Chung Myung screamed, Yu Yi-sol frowned. Chapter 83. You should call me Sago. I am your Sago. So what? You need to respect your seniors. Forget that. You're more like a ghost. Chung Myung sighed in frustration. It was ridiculous that she had such a faint and hazy presence. Certainly, the world is a large place. It's not strange that such a unique constitution exists. But her mind was also weird. In fact, Chung Myung highly specialized in detecting the presence of others with his ki. If you simply use your 5 senses instead, then it wasn't impossible to keep track of her. The real problem was something else. Just why are you following me like this? Is that how you should ask? Senior? Chung Myung felt a deep sadness in his chest. If the Sayong saw me now, they'd fall over gasping for air at the hilarity of this situation. No, they might even cry while laughing. Maybe they'd even clap their hands until they break. That was how great this sight was. Chung Myung had to respectfully address a girl who was even younger than the granddaughters of his peers. He felt as though he had attained enlightenment as he saw the world openly mocking him and showing him the futility of his actions. Would the world be fine if he decided to stray from the path and abandon these rules? No, it wouldn't, you bastard. Seriously, come on. Chung Myung took a deep breath and looked at Yu Yi-sol. So why? Why do you keep following me? Senior? Yu Yi-sol raised her eyebrow in discontent. Honestly, it looked like she was trying to slightly intimidate him, but it looked cute on her. She isn't cute just because I'm old. As Jogul and the rest of the third-class disciples said before, she was a beauty. If she had a more colorful expression and didn't give such a cold impression, then she would attract several times more attention than she does now. What an unfair world for people to care so much about appearances. Well, Chung Myung was also famous for his great looks in the past. Fine. That sword, Yu Yi-sol said while looking at Chung Myung. The sword which creates plum blossoms. I have no idea what you're talking about. Chung Myung acted dumb. It wasn't something that could be understood if explained, and he didn't have a reason to speak either. It was annoying how she had constantly pestered and followed him, so it was better to simply escape. I don't know what I did, and I don't know what you're talking about, so don't waste your time. Teach me. And go. Chung Myung was shocked. What was that? Teach me. Chung Myung narrowed his eyes. Is this the reason she followed me? He thought that she would create trouble by telling others that he secretly learned some sword techniques outside of Mount Hua or blackmail him, but he didn't expect such words to emerge. Now, he was curious. You know what? No, I don't know what you're talking about. Yu Yi-sol slightly bit her lip. I'll tell the Sasuks. Go ahead. It'll be good if they believe you. I'll tell the sect leader too. Sure. Do whatever you want. Chung Myung clenched his nose with one hand and waved with the other. Let's see if they believe you or not. Who would believe that Chung Myung, who entered Mount Hua less than a year ago, could perform the Plum Blossom Sword? What would the sect leader say? It seems like our Yu Yi-sol has had a difficult time during your closed room training. I'll find a good physician for you. That would probably be what he says. She would be lucky if they didn't toss her out of the room. Teach me and I won't tell anyone. I'm telling you, I don't care who you tell. Chung Myung smiled. So don't interfere with other people's training and go away. Because of you, I can never get any practice done. Go away, okay? Just go. You're like a leech. Chung Myung, who was about to retort again, went dumb at Yu Yi-sol, who stared and said, You aren't going to teach me. Excuse me, Sago? Huh? You are the Sago and I am the Saje. What could I even teach a Sago? Rather, I should be learning from you. Yu Yi-sol flinched at Chung Myung's words. Oh, that seemed to work. Since she kept emphasizing her seniority from the moment they met until now, this might work. There are no hierarchies when it comes to learning. No, where the hell did she learn to think like this? Did the Baek disciples have some Confucian teachings within them? How dare Confucianism enter our precious sect? So teach me. No, because I have nothing to teach you. Chung Myung bluntly cut her off. I don't know what Sago have seen, but it must have been a dream, or maybe it was a fantasy. Otherwise, you must have been overworked and hallucinated. I have no idea what Sago is even talking about. So stop with this and leave me alone. Chung Myung cut off her words, which made her narrow her eyes. I couldn't have been wrong. No, that is just nonsense because I have seen it before. Before? Chung Myung's eyes lit up. What? The atmosphere around Chung Myung changed as he glared at Yu Yi-seol with sharp eyes. A sword that makes plum blossoms bloom. The Plum Blossom Sword technique. There were numerous sword arts in Mount Hua which were modeled after plum blossoms. However, this technique does not merely mimic the shape of plum blossoms. There were only a few techniques which could truly make plum blossoms bloom, and there was no way that could be passed on to normal disciples. At the very least, one had to be an elder, and it was only transferred from a master to his disciple when the master felt that the disciple was worthy. However, on that fateful day in the past, all the elders of Mount Hua died. No one could have predicted that they would be annihilated, so none of the elders had passed their techniques on to their disciples. That is to say, if someone could make plum blossoms, it must mean that they learned the 24 Plum Blossom Sword technique, and the only place where the sword technique was currently being taught. What is your relationship with the Jeongnam sect? As Chung Myung spoke in a sneer, Yu Yi-seol tilted her head. Jeongnam? Why Jeongnam? Is she not related to them? Chung Myung stared at her face. No matter how he looked for signs of deceit, he could only see confusion in its place. If she was acting, then she would do better by giving up the sword and becoming an actor in a drama group. She could even perform in front of the emperor. However, Chung Myung didn't think that Yu Yi-seol had the brain to control her expression so perfectly. Chung Myung was losing it. But even if she was a spy of the Jeongnam sect, there was no way that she could have seen anyone perform the Plum Blossom Sword technique. The Plum Blossom Sword technique had a deeper meaning only when combined with Mount Hua's cultivation method. They couldn't have stolen that too, right? No. Chung Myung, who returned to his casual smile, shrugged his shoulders and asked, You saw it before. What do you mean? Now, Yu Yi-seol's face darkened. A very long time ago. Yu Yi-seol looked up at the sky as if recalling old memories and spoke again with a stern face. Teach me. I'm telling you that I don't know what you're talking about. Is that so? Yu Yi-seol nodded her head. Has she finally given up? Thank God, then there is nothing I can do. Shring. Yu Yi-seol unsheathed the sword from her waist as Chung Myung looked back in horror. What is up with you so suddenly? You're not going to teach me, right? What's wrong with this crazy bitch? Who draws their sword just because somebody wouldn't teach them swordsmanship? What the hell were these Baek disciples being taught? You're drawing your sword just because I won't teach you? It's because you are right. What? I am the senior and you are the junior, so I need to educate you properly. Yu Yi-seol raised her sword and aimed it at Chung Myung. Seeing that, he smiled. No wonder the Baek disciples aren't close to her. Of course they weren't, because she was absolutely insane. Isn't her obsession with the Plum Blossom Sword technique weird too? I'm coming. What? Coming? Don't come. But there was no way this mad woman would listen to Chung Myung. Yu Yi-seol quickly ran towards Chung Myung with her sword pointed straight. Ah! Chung Myung quickly retreated with the wooden sword in his hand as the sword of Yu Yi-seol arrived before him. No! What kind of Sago would attack your Saje with a real sword? Because you are stronger than me. Huh? That is true, isn't it? No. But what makes her believe that? She couldn't possibly have known that. How strange. She clearly had the wrong impression, but Chung Myung couldn't even correct her because she ended up with the correct answer. Just like Chung Myung had seen before, Yu Yi-sol's sword was light and had a brilliant elegance to it. It pierces sharply and bends gently. The sword shakes like an illusion before lightly stabbing in again. Mount Hua's sword. Since returning to Mount Hua, Chung Myung had seen many swords. He had seen the Baek disciples, Eungeum's, and sometimes he had the opportunity to see the Elder's sword as well. However, the sword unfolding before him now was closer to the true source of Mount Hua than any of the others he had seen. Just seeing this swordsmanship made him feel strangely sentimental. Why? Because her movements resembles the past Mount Hua? If not... Move. At that moment, Yu Yi-sol's sword came to pierce Chung Myung at the speed of light. Chung Myung turned his head and narrowly avoided it. Swash! Several strands of his hair lightly drifted to the ground. Was this crazy bitch really going to stab him? Have you gone insane? If I didn't avoid that, I would have died. There's no way that you wouldn't have avoided it. Why are you so confident in me? What is wrong with her head? Why doesn't she think like normal people? No wonder she has such a pretty face but no friends. There was no time for conversation. Yu Yi-sol's sword began to sharpen as she closed in on Chung Myung. Still, it would be easy enough for him to deal with it. If he could attack, that is. If Chung Myung turned Yu Yi-sol's attack against herself, then she would go from being confident in his skills to a hardcore fan of his. He needed to find some way to subdue her without getting hurt and without showing his ability. Swish. I said don't do that, woman. It's Sago. What kind of Sago tries to kill her junior? Just what is wrong with your brain? Oh my ancestors. This is how far our Mount Hua has fallen. Chung Myung, who was lamenting his fate, frowned for a moment. Perhaps it was because he was able to leisurely observe the incoming attacks despite their conversation, but he could see Yu Yi-sol's movement slowly changing. As if her eyes were drunk and losing focus, her sword began to deviate from the set path. Oh? Enlightenment in the middle of a spar. Even Jogul couldn't achieve that. Jogul could be considered the best in Mount Hua in terms of swordsmanship talent. No. Chung Myung stretched out his wooden sword and helped the deviating sword return to the proper path. Achieving enlightenment meant entering a trance-like state and finding their one true sword. If you intervened without the confidence or ability to handle it, then it was possible that the enlightened state could be shattered immediately. In the worst case, they may even receive a backlash and die. Ordinary people would have rushed to retreat without daring to get involved. But Chung Myung could anticipate and understand the sword's path at each moment and lead the sword in the best direction. Not there. Right. This side. No. I said here. Tuck, tuck. Chung Myung would stretch out his sword and tap Yu Yi-sol's sword, leading it to the correct path. The only thing that could be done in such a situation was to let it flow. What are you doing, you bastard? Chung Myung turned his head to see who suddenly intervened. Baekchun, who seemed to have lost his mind in anger, rushed to him at a frantic speed. Ugh, why the hell are you here, you damn brat? Chapter 84. What are you doing, you bastard? Seeing Baekchun running at an insane speed, Chung Myung looked up at the sky with a soulless face. Oh dear, my poor fate. Baekchun lunged at Chung Myung and swung his sword without hesitation. Wait, why did he also have a real sword? What is with these disciples constantly taking out real swords? Who will take responsibility if they unsheath their sword and something crazy happens? While Chung Myung was lost in thought, Baekchun's sword threateningly sped towards him. A deep blue and black key formed around it, aiming for Chung Myung's shoulder. Baekchun did well to aim at a non-vital area despite his hysteria. But, the after effects of that sword key will kill me anyway, you crazy bastard! Chung Myung kicked the flying sword with his foot. Kang! A loud sound rang throughout the area as the sword, layered in ki, and the foot collided with one another. Unable to withstand the impact, Baekchun was thrown back. Baekchun swiftly rose to his feet, alternating between Chung Myung and his sword. His eyes shook in bewilderment. Everything happened so quickly for him that he didn't understand what had happened. Chung Myung clicked his tongue and examined Yu Yi-sol's condition. Such a huge sound broke out next to her while she was in a trance. So her enlightenment. She's fine. Normally, this much commotion would rouse a person from their enlightenment, but Yu Yi-sol was still entranced. Slow. She's too slow, but she was benefiting from her dull-wittedness. It wasn't common for a person to fall into a trance while swinging their sword. In Buddhism, it was referred to as exaltation, in the sense that one forgets themselves, casting off their shell and entering a new realm. For warriors, this was the absolute most crucial moment. If she had been woken out of it, she would have regretted it all her life. Bastard! What are you doing? Don't you know how important enlightenment is for a warrior? And you attacked me despite knowing that? Chung Myung gazed at Baekchun with wide eyes. Touching someone in a trance. No matter how little common sense you have, there are some things you can't do, you ruthless brat. Baekchun stared at Chung Myung. It's true that I didn't like you, but I had no idea you were such a rotten bastard you'd even mess with someone in a trance. I should correct that habit of yours right now. Chung Myung took a deep breath. No, you idiot. I didn't mess with her. I helped guide her. But how would you know that? It's my fault. I'm the sinner here. If you knew how important the trance was, then why did you draw your sword and attack? What? What if your sword had gone towards Sago and hurt her? If you hadn't counterattacked, then I should just die? Chung Myung responded to Baekchun, who seemed flustered. Are all the Baek disciples crazy? The world is usually dominated by ordinary people, with a few madmen mixed in. However, it seemed like the Baek disciples took that rule in reverse and flooded themselves with insane kids. Out of all the Baek disciples Chung Myung talked to, there wasn't a single normal person yet. If Yoonjung had heard, he would have said that one dog was barking at another, but he wasn't here to complain. Are you saying that I was trying to kill you? It didn't look like you wanted me alive. It was an urgent situation, and you even drew a sword. That... Baekchun's face, which heard Chung Myung's argument, flinched. Wait a moment. As Chung Myung said, Baekchun utilized sword ki on a real sword, so how was he able to escape without a single wound? Does that mean this kid could casually handle Baekchun's attack? Get away from Same! Baekchun's face hardened as he spoke in a determined voice. I won't ask what you were doing, but put your sword down and step away from her. Otherwise, you will have to deal with me as a warrior and not your Sasuk. Oh, doesn't that sound good? Chung Myung was delighted. Really? Great. This was what Chung Myung was hoping for. You bastard. Until the end. Baekchun gnashed his teeth. Humans were the sort that needed to adjust their thinking based on their individual situations. If your perspective changed, then Baekchun's anger was reasonable. From his point of view, an irredeemable taboo had been transgressed by his junior. Normally, it was right to put a stop to those actions. The problem was, Chung Myung licked his lips and turned his head. If I help a little more, it seems like something amazing will happen. Yu Yi-sol was currently in a state of enlightenment. Although it usually didn't occur in such a random fashion, enlightenment always comes on suddenly. Who knew when, or even if she would have another opportunity like this? Some people fight and struggle their entire lives without ever experiencing enlightenment, while others reach that state from ordinary tasks like eating. This wasn't something that could be sought after with effort, or because one desires it to happen. It depends on the will of heaven, and the greatest miracle that occurred to Yu Yi-sol was not simply enlightenment. It was that Chung Myung was by her side at the time she entered her trance. Basically, those who fall into a trance forget themselves and their surroundings, focusing solely on their sword. During this, they develop their own sword or the next level of their sword, and sometimes they achieve a higher realm. That was why nobody should tamper or touch them. A serious accident could happen if the opponent didn't understand how to properly handle the sword. But who is Chung Myung? He is an amazing martial artist who understands all of Mount Hua's sword techniques and set foot on a plateau no one had ever climbed before. With his current body, attaining enlightenment might not be possible, but it will be difficult to find anyone in Mount Hua who has a better understanding of sword techniques. Even if one considers the entire history of Mount Hua, one might not find a greater master. So, he could intervene in Yu Yiso's trance and guide her to a higher realm. Why did that bastard have to show up? It is even more difficult to lead one in front of others. If something went wrong, it would turn into a bigger problem. Chung Myung glanced at Yu Yiso. What can I do? This is your luck. Although it was a pity that he couldn't help someone who might lead Mount Hua, Chung Myung didn't feel much regret since that ship had already sailed. But it's another thing altogether to beat the guy who made you miss the ship. Chung Myung took a couple of steps away from Yu Yisol and glared at Baekchun. Is this enough? More. He once again took a couple of steps away from Yu Yisol. Is this good? Are you messing with me? Get out of here. I have no intention of letting you harm Same. Who's the one causing harm here? You're the one causing harm. Is that any way to speak to your senior? Chung Myung speechlessly stared at the sky after hearing Baekchun's response. Why are these kids so obsessed with formalities? Yu Yisol was the same, and now Baekchun too. Yes, Sasuk, the problem here is Sasuk. Baekchun stared at Chung Myung with cold eyes. I tried to understand the reason for your arrogance. What was the result? The moment Chung Myung arrives, he talks shit and escalates a problem and makes it all about himself. And now he acts like a master. The problem here is also because of him, right? But my patience has its limit, and there are people in this world who don't understand words. Wow! Baekchun frowned at Chung Myung's exclamation. What are you trying to say? Nothing at all. It's just a bit funny. What is? You wouldn't understand even if I told you. It's been 100 years, and he was saying the same thing Chung Myung used to say when he was a Sahyung. There's no use talking to you. Rather than discussing the path of Tao to Sahyung, it would be faster to recite it to a cow or a hen. Don't bother speaking if you can't fight. Humans are so similar. Otherwise, Chung Myung hasn't changed much in 100 years. Baekchun sharply called out to Chung Myung, who was chuckled in reminiscence. Raise your sword. Today, I will teach you what manners are. Will you be fine? Bastard! No, not that. But if you are in a hurry. As Chung Myung spoke, Baekchun narrowed his eyes. What do you want to say? No, I'm just worried. If news got out that Sasuk fought with his Saje, then your name might be tarnished. Baekchun laughed bitterly. After coming this far, now you want to play that card? You are wrong if you think that your peers or the elders will protect you. Perhaps in the future, but at this moment, there is no one that can save you. As for my punishment, I will accept it later. Oh, I haven't heard such a manly speech in a while. Chung Myung nodded his head. But I have a better idea. Would you like to hear it? What are you planning? No, nothing. Let's each just swear an oath. We won't tell another soul about what happens here tonight. What? Chung Myung smiled. I'm saying that even if I get beaten, I won't tell any of the elders or anyone else. Likewise, you can't run and tell anyone if you lose this battle. Do you understand what I'm saying? Baekchun looked at Chung Myung. What is he thinking? Baekchun examined Chung Myung's expression, then smiled. It looks like you're trying to get out of this situation. But do you think I'll care if you try these tricks? No, that's not the case. Chung Myung sighed, unable to overcome his frustration. I'm saying that we should throw away the titles of Sasuk, Saje, and Sahyung and have a clean fight. If we make a promise to each other that no matter what happens, I will not reach out to my seniors, I will stand here and fight my best. Of course, the same goes for Sasuk too. What do you think? Baekchun had a subtle smile. All right, it seems you have quite a manly side to you. If you want, then I swear, I won't tell anyone what happens here. From Baekchun's point of view, There was no reason not to accept that offer. The most difficult part of beating Chung Myung would be dealing with the undisciples, or the elders. Wasn't it obvious that they were all protective of Chung Myung? So, if news got out that Baekchun attacked him, wouldn't it cause an endless amount of trouble for him? Yet now, Chung Myung himself wanted to keep this matter hidden. There was no reason for Baekchun to refuse. But he couldn't erase this weird feeling inside him. Then I swear, you seriously have a manly side as well. Yes, I swear too. Then our grudges will vanish the moment we finish. Baekchun lifted his shining sword and pointed towards Chung Myung. I'll admit that you're quite bold. In this fight, I am not your Sasuk, nor are you my Saje. I will use this fight to settle all the bad feelings that I have towards you. And you too. Fight? At that moment, he heard an eerie voice from Chung Myung. Baekchun looked at Chung Myung with curiosity in his eyes. Huh? Then he noticed. Chung Myung was smiling, but unlike before, this was an evil grin that distorted his wicked features. Fight? You're going to die now, you bastard, Chung Myung said as he walked towards Baekchun. Chapter 85. Has he lost his mind? Baekchun couldn't help but feel flustered. Chung Myung was walking with his head tilted to the side. It looked like some back alley gangster walking in to threaten innocent civilians. There were two reasons why Baekchun was flustered. First was that Chung Myung, acting like a gangster, seemed to suit him too well. Second, the person Chung Myung was currently intimidating was none other than Baekchun himself. Is he going out of his mind? Baekchun was Chung Myung's Sasuk. Of course, that wasn't important because they both agreed beforehand that they would leave their titles behind for this battle. What truly mattered was that Baekchun was different from Chung Myung, who had just entered the sect. Baekchun entered Mount Hua when he was even younger than Chung Myung. In other words, he had already spent over 15 years learning martial arts. But what about Chung Myung? It's only been half a year since he started. Even if Chung Myung began training within his mother's womb, he would still have spent less time practicing than Baekchun. Even if Chung Myung was talented enough to become the world's greatest master, right now it was impossible for him to defeat Baekchun. Even those with talent need time to properly develop. If talent alone could surpass the walls of time, then would anyone even try to master martial arts? But what is with his reaction? However, Chung Myung acted as if he truly believed he could defeat Baekchun. Baekchun was so confused that he couldn't even speak. You've really gone crazy. No, not at all. The crazy one here is you. What? If you weren't crazy, then why would you try and challenge me? If those who were entangled with Chung Myung in the past were present, they would all vigorously be nodding their heads. The Jungnam sect called him the devil that descended from Mount Hua, and the Wudang sect used to say that Chung Myung's name reached the sky, but his evil deeds covered the earth. I'm gonna fucking kill you. Chung Myung raised his hand. Surprisingly, Chung Myung wasn't someone who liked resorting to violence. What? What about all the things he's done so far? That was all because the others wouldn't listen otherwise. For Chung Myung, violence was just a means to an end. He ultimately wanted everyone to do well on their own, without Chung Myung having to force them again. Why would anyone use violence if everything could be settled peacefully? People only got beatings because they refused to listen. But now, Chung Myung started to think it might be better to use violence as an end rather than means. Your self-indulgence knows no bounds. My hands are heavy and full of resent. Come on. What did you say? Chung Myung just shrugged his shoulders. I usually don't like talking before a fight, but I'll listen to you speak, since in a little while, you won't be able to speak even if you want to. Arrogant until the end. You bastard. Baekchun grabbed his sword. He also didn't want to waste any more time. I was going to go easy on him. Baekchun ground his teeth. No matter how angry he was, he couldn't actually cut down his own junior. But Chung Myung could be overwhelmed with swordsmanship. Baekchun intended to beat Chung Myung so thoroughly that he would piss himself in fear whenever they crossed paths. Baekchun grasped his sword and rushed towards Chung Myung. The sword quickly cut through the air towards Chung Myung. It was a sword that seemed different from Yu Yiseol's. At first glance, they may look similar. However, Baekchun's was heavier and fiercer. In a way, it was the same as the Jungnam sect, a sword that minimizes the colorful changes that were the basis of Mount Hua's art to take advantage in a sword fight. With only a moment of inspection, Chung Myung had firmly understood the essence of Baekchun's style. Strange. The Jungnam sect abandoned their swords and tried to emulate the splendor of Mount Hua. However, Baekchun reduced the splendor of Mount Hua's sword to achieve the simplicity of the Jungnam sect. Well, thinking about it, it was normal. All sword arts undergo constant changes, and those changes are always seeking to advance the style. Naturally, one would seek inspiration for their swordsmanship from those who are in a better condition than themselves. In Mount Hua's heyday, the Jungnam sect was crushed by Chung Myung and would have thought that a flashier sword was the answer. On the other hand, the second-class disciples of the current Mount Hua were crushed by the Jungnam sect through the conference and desperately recognized the gap between their skills. They must have considered the sword of the Jungnam sect to be the right answer. It was understandable that both sects would resemble one another. But, pathetic fools. Chung Myung narrowed his eyes. Does that mean Baekchun learned the style of the Jungnam sect because there was nothing more for him to learn here? Well, Chung Myung didn't like this bastard from the start. An idiot who doesn't even understand what he has now covets someone else's art? Chung Myung must let him know what Mount Hua has. Baekchun rushed in. I'm going to change your attitude today. Chung Myung clenched his fist as he watched Baekchun rushing towards him. I'll change? He put his right foot back. That habit of yours, and tilted his back a little. Which? The fist pulled back and then extended forward. No one fixed till now, you son of a bitch! Pride. Chung Myung's fist penetrated through the changes made in Baekchun's sword. A fist that stretched out at an accurate angle and appropriate speed, aiming between the changes and transitions. Baekchun was shocked as he saw the fist of Chung Myung piercing through the sword technique. It was easy to say that it could be done. However, it was absurd that Chung Myung could accurately shove his fist through a sword art that could easily slice his arm off. From Baekchun's point of view, it felt as if the arm of a ghost had emerged from the abyss. But there was no time to be surprised. Baekchun's jaw was hit. And he heard a squeaking sound behind his neck. In an instant, his consciousness flew away, then swiftly returned. When he came to his senses, his body had been knocked back repeatedly, bouncing off the ground. What? What just happened? His senses had dulled for a moment. Baekchun didn't realize what had happened to his body when he bounced back. He was overtaken with a distant understanding of reality. The moment his body settled on the ground, an indescribable pain shook him to the core. His back was fine, but searing pain radiated from his jaw. Grabbing his chin, Baekchun groaned. Learning martial arts meant that one had to get used to suffering. It wasn't simply pain from pushing the body to its limit, but also frequent injuries from training and sparring. But this was unlike any pain Baekchun had suffered before. It really felt like a new world of pain had opened up for him. Wake up, you bastard! Chung Myung said while tilting his head and approaching Baekchun. Seeing that, Baekchun got up. Chung Myung seemed a bit surprised. Oh, you actually got up? Obviously, he got up. While he was enduring the pain in his jaw, Baekchun felt like his heart was being rent as Chung Myung mocked him. Baekchun struggled to comprehend the current situation. He desperately tried to calm his trembling legs and raise his sword again. The bitter taste of blood in his mouth clearly reminded him of reality. How? Baekchun was not stupid. The early exchange was no accident. No one in this world would risk losing their arm to a sword technique for a chance at a lucky strike. In other words, Baekchun's sword was clearly visible to Chung Myung's eyes. How did you do that? Chung Myung looked at Baekchun as if he was pathetic. Your technique reduces the myriad changes and flows between the changes depending on how you choose. But so what? Did you think that your technique was flawless? Really, for every one thing that you know, there are two things you don't. Of course there are gaps in your sword art. Baekchun stood there, wide-eyed. No one managed to find them till now. Obviously, because the people you were dealing with were stupid. Any elder could have figured it out immediately. Wait, maybe not. What was the level of the current elders? Let's just leave that aside. You mean my sword is wrong? Yeah. Chung Myung spoke as if he didn't even need to think about it. For now, you're standing ahead of your peers by a little bit, but as time passes, your sages will start to outpace and overtake you. How can you know that? You only recently joined the sect. I can't believe your words. I won't. Do whatever you want. Chung Myung smiled bitterly. The disciples of Mount Hua were committing the same mistakes the Jungnam sect did, and Chung Myung could even understand their reasons. It isn't that strange. Perhaps, even in Chung Myung's time, something like this happened countless times. At the time, however, Chung Myung simply didn't know what consequences such a change could bring. Due to Chung Myung's vast experience, his eyes could see how someone's sword would develop. Seeing young disciples who were only beginning to develop their style, things that had never been noticed before began to appear. Be grateful that I am a disciple of Mount Hua. What? Chung Myung raised his wooden sword. Honestly, Chung Myung still wanted to crush Baekchun, but wasn't he also one of Mount Hua's cute disciples? Even if he was going to be crushed, it would be nice to beat him in a way that would help his development. Don't worry, I'll take you down with a sword instead of a fist. I'm so kind. Is Chung Myung crazy? No, he really is crazy, right? Seeing the bewildered expression on Baekchun, Chung Myung took a deep breath. Some say that the purpose of Mount Hua's sword was to resemble plum blossoms. But that is only what those who are unfamiliar with Mount Hua's sword say. Mount Hua's sword doesn't imitate plum blossoms. The sword of Mount Hua aims for... Chung Myung, who had been speaking seriously, suddenly frowned. Never mind. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes it's easier to understand when your body gets beaten rather than with your brain. Here I come. Without realizing it, Baekchun took a step back. However, the speed at which Chung Myung rushed towards him was twice as fast. Baekchun swung his sword and tried to stall Chung Myung. Even if he was injured, his instincts as a swordsman still allowed his body to react before he had time to process what was happening. At that time, Baekchun noticed. The image of Chung Myung's fingers slightly trembled, then the wooden sword multiplied into dozens or more and filled his vision. What is that? Thighs! Thwack! The wooden sword hit Baekchun's thigh, and he opened his mouth with tears brimming in his eyes. But it didn't end there. Wrist! Thwack! Chung Myung's sword precisely struck Baekchun's wrist, which was holding the sword. From wrist to hand, it felt like his arm went numb for a moment, and he lost his grip on his sword. Hold on! At that moment, Baekchun's ears were filled with a sound he dreaded hearing. Head! 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 Why not just once, you bastard? Bang! 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 Baekchun was hit by a series of blows, feeling like his head was going to explode. His mouth fell open as his eyes rolled back. Even as he collapsed, his mind was obsessed over a single thought. Why did you say head 5 times, but hit me 6 times? It was a question that was left unsolved as his consciousness flew away. Chapter 86. As soon as Baekchun regained his senses, terrible pain came over him. He could barely get up as he groaned in pain from his head, which felt like it was splitting open. How long have I been out? It felt like a long time had passed as Baekchun awoke. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw the dark sky. Fortunately, it seemed like it had been less than half a day at the most. When he turned his head to the side, he saw Yu Yisol slowly wielding her sword in the distance. It doesn't seem like much time has passed. Of course, it wasn't possible to infer the time from her form alone. A person experiencing enlightenment sometimes doesn't return to reality for several days or more. Suddenly, Baekchun's ears were greeted with the sound of an eerie voice which was both familiar and unfamiliar. Up already? Baekchun's head reeled around. The figure of Chung Myung squatting, with a wooden sword draped over his shoulder, came into his view. Flinch. Baekchun's body tensed and screamed to retreat before he could calm down and hurriedly move back. I guess you are a bit surprised. Chung Myung smiled. Baekchun stared at Chung Myung with shocked eyes. I lost. No, it wasn't that he lost. The fight from before was so embarrassing that it bordered on laughable to discuss victory and defeat. He still didn't understand how it happened. There was only one conclusion he could arrive at. He was completely outclassed. Baekchun raised his hand and touched his head. His head, which was beaten by Chung Myung, was still ringing like a bell. But it wasn't something to be embarrassed about. The scoundrel who knocked him out cold was watching him with eyes wide open. Can I ask you one thing? Sure. How are you so strong? What? Chung Myung looked at Baekchun. Interesting. Usually, people who experience such nonsensical things are unable to accept reality. Even when the result was clear and obvious, they would kick and scream in denial and lash out like a wild boar. In particular, those overly boastful types that are full of pride never seem to admit defeat until they've been beaten again and again. However, Baekchun managed to acknowledge reality rather quickly, despite his prideful nature. That's at least one thing that deserves to be praised. But it's not that I'm strong. It was Sasuk that was weak. Me? Yes. Baekchun's eyes trembled a little. I'm weak? Yes. Baekchun staggered and rose to his feet, glaring at Chung Myung with eyes that could kill. Don't look down on me. I am Baekchun, the great Scion of the Baek disciples, and the person who will one day lead the Mount Hua Sect. Right. Chung Myung politely nodded his head. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with Baekchun's words. There was just one thing. But that doesn't mean that you aren't weak. As Baekchun couldn't refute, Chung Myung raised his finger and pointed to his senior. A frog in the well. That's the right phrase for Sasuk right now. A well so narrow that even passing frogs wouldn't think of entering it, and a frog with its inflated ego trapped at the bottom. Baekchun's face was distorted. And I'm the frog. Yes. Me. Chung Myung grinned at Baekchun, who couldn't admit the truth and continued to ask the same question. You are the frog, Sasuk. Sasuk should already know that Mount Hua is on the verge of ruin. Of course. It was harsh to say that it was on the verge of ruin, but there was no denying that it had fallen. And it was Baekchun's role to resurrect Mount Hua. At least, that was what he had believed until now. That's why I've been trying so hard till now, to somehow make Mount Hua... Sasuk? Chung Myung looked at Baekchun with absurd eyes. When did you try hard? Baekchun was at a loss for words at Chung Myung's question. It doesn't seem like that to me at all. It looks like a bunch of kids left to go play house and close up together before returning and partying at a restaurant, drinking and congratulating one another on a job well done. Even now, when the conference is fast approaching, aren't you and the other Sasuks wasting time bullying the third-class disciples? What effort? What trying hard are you doing? Baekchun went silent. Until now, he never thought that he lacked effort. However, he couldn't say anything when Chung Myung pointed out his inadequacies. It seems like the Sasuks don't know what hard work truly is. Doing everything you want to do and investing the remaining time to train isn't working hard, nor is it effort. The Sasuks didn't really try till now. You just wanted to rule over a small kingdom called Mount Hua. There was no competition for you around, and no one could nag you. It was a comfortable setting for you, right? Baekchun bit his lip. No, don't make such a face. I'm not criticizing Sasuk. But if you refuse to be compared to others and want to live like a king here, you shouldn't be talking about how hard you tried. Chung Myung said sullenly. Have you ever had a proper fight with anyone? At best, you should have confronted the Jongnam sect. Sasuk, the Jongnam sect may be treated like a grim reaper here, but the Jongnam sect is nearly the bottom of the 10 great sects. The disciples of the other 9 sects are soaring through the sky. Are you strong enough to fly with them? You think you're strong, Sasuk? Chung Myung had a smirk on his face. Don't get me wrong, you frog. It isn't that I'm strong. It's just that you were weak. An alarm rang loudly in Baekchun's head. Am I weak? He didn't want to admit it. However, there wasn't a single mistake in Chung Myung's words. Mount Hua was struggling to contend with the Jongnam sect. Actually, even if he took part in the conference and managed to defeat them, there were other sects stronger than them. Then does that mean there are people stronger than you in the other great sects too? What bullshit! I'm the strongest! You aren't making any sense, you bastard. But it's not because I'm stronger than Sasuk. Right now, Sasuk wouldn't even be able to beat over the Jongnam sect. Of course, it's not even worth comparing you to the Shaolin or Wudang sects. Baekchun bit his lip. However, Chung Myung threw another sharp word at Baekchun without mercy. So even if it wasn't me, there are plenty of people that could defeat Sasuk. Do you understand? I understand, but I don't want to understand. Who would ever want to acknowledge that they were just another grain of sand in this world? But Baekchun clenched his teeth without protesting. I know. You think that a disciple of Mount Hua doesn't understand that. I know. I certainly know. But it doesn't matter. I am not a disciple of the Wudang sect, so I have no choice but to work hard with what I have. But you didn't work hard, Sasuk, Chung Myung said with a sullen face. You didn't try hard enough, and the direction of your effort was wrong anyway. Do you think that someone can become a master just by working hard? Then you should give this up and try doing that. After 500 years of beating up scarecrows, maybe you'll finally be able to properly use your sword. Chung Myung had refined pissing people off with his words to an art form. While frowning deeply, Baekchun asked, So you know how I should train? I think I at least know better than Sasuk. Chung Myung smiled. At that, Baekchun sighed. Goblin-like bastard. Baekchun couldn't understand this child. How could he be strong and bold? How did he still have that relaxed expression on his face? He couldn't understand. That's why he can confidently act so cocky. In Chung Myung's eyes, the Baek disciples are nothing more than fools with no skills that argue and harass others with their authority. Even if their situations were reversed, he would have only acted worse than Chung Myung. Just one thing was certain now. Chung Myung was stronger than Baekchun could imagine. He didn't know how, but he was stronger than the Baek disciples. Even if Baekchun sparred with Eunam or Eungum, he wouldn't be defeated as disastrously as this. After a moment of hesitation, Baekchun looked at Chung Myung with determined eyes. Then, can you make me strong? Huh? Chung Myung narrowed his eyes. I knew it. This guy is definitely strange. Baekchun had great pride, yet remained aware of reality. Usually, when one thing goes wrong, everything goes wrong. Putting that bluntly, this bastard was a prideful person who knew his situation very clearly. Wasn't this the most terrifying aspect of a human? But it wasn't bad, especially not for a martial artist. In the end, such a person will become strong, or perhaps his pride could drive him to become the strongest. Of course, that's possible. Baekchun quietly nodded his head. Then, bowing with both hands outstretched to beg, Baekchun spoke in a serious tone. Please, make me strong. I will do anything you ask of me. Baekchun lifted his head and continued. If I can become strong, I wouldn't hesitate to learn from Saje. If our relationship as Sasuke and Saje is a burden to you, I will not treat you as one. Don't want to. As a teacher. Huh? Chung Myung answered again. No, I don't want to. Why? Baekchun asked. Wait, wasn't he saying all that nonsense to Baekchun because he wanted this to happen? Why should I? It's bothersome. And you seem to be mistaken, Sasuke. What? It isn't over yet. Chung Myung stood up, raised the wooden sword, and spun it around. There is something very strange about humans. They don't think about what they've done and come to compromises in their own minds. They always think they've done enough to repent for their crimes. Yep, right. That's right. You must pay for your sinful actions. Have you paid? Bullshit. Maybe you paid enough for how much you harassed the third-class disciples. But... Chung Myung's eyes were blazing. My anger won't subside with just that. No, you idiot. Baekchun stepped back, terrified. However, Chung Myung slowly approached Baekchun with a reaper-like smile. You still don't get it, right? No, I get it. I'm already convinced too. No. Sasuke doesn't understand yet. It's clear from what happened just now. Why do you get to decide whether I understand or not? He said he gets it. Don't worry, the night is long. I'll make sure to convince you tonight. Why? Just why my Sasuke is so weak and why my Sasuke sword is wrong. And, Chung Myung's eyes shone again. Why you shouldn't touch me. Here I come. Sadly, Baekchun's screams couldn't reach Mount Hua. Unfortunately for him. Chapter 87. Thud. Chung Myung refreshingly stretched his body as he watched Baekchun collapse once more to the ground. It feels like I've been relieved of a 10-year indigestion. Chung Myung smiled as he looked at Baekchun, who was completely out cold and unable to move. I did my best. Although a bit heavy-handed, Chung Myung beat Baekchun without leaving any lasting injuries on his body. Even though he fainted, he would be fine once he woke up, though the pain would linger for around a day. Right, it feels comfortable to just beat up your problems like this. Chung Myung turned around. Whether Baekchun and the others could compete in the conference wasn't Chung Myung's problem. No. Come to think of it, he didn't want to see the Jongnam bastards act triumphantly in front of him. So how... Shit! You shocked me! As Chung Myung was squatting and contemplating, he was suddenly startled and quickly escaped to the side. Yu Yi-sol had appeared in front of him, squatting and staring without warning. Seriously, are you a ghost? He had to do something about her. If this kept happening again and again, he was bound to die from a heart attack before Mount Hua could even revive. Announce yourself when you appear. Say something. I did. When? Before, when you were beating him. Chung Myung glanced at Baekchun, who was laid out like a corpse, and turned to Yu Yi-sol. A soft smile appeared on her lips. You saw that? Yes. You saw everything? Only from a little while ago. Are you going to kill me? No, that's a bit too far. She always goes for killing and murder. Chung Myung closely examined Yu Yi-sol's head and tilted his head. What? No, I just thought that if I slapped the back of your head a little, you might forget what you saw. Amnesia or something, you know? I forgot. Really? Yes, I forgot everything. She's dull, but has great survival instincts. Chung Myung narrowed his eyes as Yu Yi-sol spoke. Instead, teach me that sword. This woman never gives up. What is going on in her head? He had barely escaped before, but it wasn't possible anymore. Hadn't she even seen Chung Myung happily beating Baekchun? He couldn't hide his skills anymore. Then, he should change his strategy. Chung Myung took a deep breath and began to speak. Why do you want to learn it? Maybe it was an unexpected counterattack because Yu Yi-sol slightly flinched. She looked at Chung Myung with a somewhat shocked expression to show such an expression on her face. She's the kind that can't lie. Yu Yi-sol hesitated for a moment and then opened her lips. I cannot tell you the reason, but... Yet, there was sincerity in her hesitancy. I need to master that sword art. Chung Myung looked at Yu Yi-sol. I don't think she's interested merely because she thinks it's pretty. There was a certain eagerness in her eyes. She was safeguarding a story that gave birth to her stubbornness. A tale that Chung Myung hadn't the faintest idea about. So you want to learn that technique? Yu Yi-sol decisively nodded. You don't need to. Huh? It was originally Mount Hua sword art. If you wait, you will naturally be able to learn it. Mount Hua no longer teaches it. Oh? She knows that it no longer exists in Mount Hua. Then, that means she recognized that the sword Chung Myung unfolded was the Plum Blossom Sword technique. To be precise though, it was Chung Myung's variation of the Plum Blossom Sword technique. Chung Myung nodded. Yes, it's not in Mount Hua right now, but it'll be back soon, once the time is right. Time? Chung Myung looked at Yu Yi-sol. Instead of answering her question, he stretched his hand out and pointed at the sky. Soon, Chung Myung's finger smoothly cut through the air. At first, Yu Yi-sol tilted her head as if she couldn't understand the gestures. Soon, however, she realized that his hand was drawing a sword path and observed it seriously. The Yu Maiden Sword. That's right. Yu Yi-sol gasped upon seeing Chung Myung's gestures. It was definitely the Yu Maiden Sword, the technique that she had polished and honed for the longest time. However, Chung Myung's Yu Maiden Sword differed from Yu Yi-sol's. Rather than a difference in the movements, there seemed to be a more fundamental difference. When the variable short and long hand gestures ended, Yu Yi-sol sighed quietly. Did you understand? Yu Yi-sol shook her head. No, I don't understand a thing. The moment Chung Myung was about to say something, Yu Yi-sol spoke up first. But it'll be my task to figure it out. I think I know what you're talking about. You mean that I can't begin learning it unless I reach a certain level, right? Yes, I must lay the foundation by refining what I have now. You understood well. Yu Yi-sol nodded. I understand. Chung Myung looked at Yu Yi-sol. I thought she was dumb, but I guess she has a good head. After all, the mind and the personality are separate things. Right, but if you tell anyone about what happened here today, I will never teach you. I won't speak a word about it. Very nice. That's a good girl. As Chung Myung nodded, Yu Yi-sol narrowed her eyes. I am your senior, and you are my junior. I know, right? Good girl. Chung Myung could see Yu Yi-sol's hand tightly clenching her sword. Chung Myung quickly turned around. Then, until we meet again, Sago, don't come to me before then. It's annoying. Hey! Yu Yi-sol reached out and tried to catch Chung Myung, but he didn't wait around and immediately headed down the mountain. Ah! And throw that idiot inside his room. If you leave him here, he'll just die of shock when he gets up. Yu Yi-sol sighed at Chung Myung's words, which echoed from afar. Plum blossoms. The tip of Chung Myung's sword released the plum blossoms, a sight she had been unable to see despite all her time spent in Mount Hua. Yu Yi-sol closed her eyes. The sword moved inside her mind. The tip of the sword smoothly sliced through the air before shaking. Then, it began to release brilliantly bright and clear plum blossoms at the end of the sword, the man holding that sword. Father, I will clearly restore this technique. One day, I'd like to return to Mount Hua and repent for my sins with this. Yi-sol, come with me. There's no place better than Mount Hua. Yet, he didn't manage to make the plum blossoms bloom fully in the end. But now, Right in front of her was a person who could make it happen. I must learn it at all costs. Bang! Chung Myung sprinted through the door of the White Plum Blossom boarding hall. He's here! And was met with a strange reaction. What? Although it was early morning, it seemed like Yoonjung and Jogul were waiting for him on the first floor. It seems like your training has gotten a bit too comfortable. Are you here to check up on me? No, this place was a mess. Huh? Baekchun Sahyung was missing, so the Sasuks all came and checked this place out. Those disgusting bastards. Why would they come to this storm if Baekchun went missing? Did they think Chung Myung kidnapped him? Ah, I didn't think about that. I could have kidnapped him and beat him up in secret. It seemed like some intelligent kids were mixed in with the second-class disciples. They're tossing accusations out without any proof. It pisses me off. Hearing those words, Yoonjung smiled. I guess it wasn't you. Thank God. They were right, though. If they were right, then why are you getting offended? Why? No, that wasn't important. You with Baekchun Sahyung? Yes. Wait, I guess this isn't what I think it was, right? What do you think it was? Yoonjung smiled a bit awkwardly. It's unlikely. I know you're a very thoughtful person, so what I am thinking about probably didn't happen. But I hope that you didn't decide to hit Sahyung's face or punch him in the stomach like you said before. What's the difference between the two? Attacks to the face add bonus damage. Jogul nodded in agreement, as if acknowledging the truth of that statement. Chung Myung waved his hands in the air. It's not like I'm some kid. No, right. Chung Myung, this Sahyung always believed in you. No matter how crazy you are, you wouldn't hit our Sasuk. I didn't hit him. Right. I beat the shit out of him. Right. Shit out of him. Baekchun is already a shitty person. What? Yoonjung's face trembled. Beat? Yes. Who? Our Sasuk? It's a joke, right? No way. Am I a person that jokes about a beating? At that moment, Yoonjung rushed to Chung Myung at the speed of light and shook him by the collar. Hey, you crazy dog! Do you always have to do your best even when you're causing trouble? What do we do if he tells someone what happened? This is all because you don't understand how serious the crime of assaulting a senior within the same sect is. Oh God. Chung Myung kicked Yoonjung. After lightly disposing of Yoonjung, Chung Myung caressed his neck. I already know all that. There won't be any problems, so quit worrying. Don't you know how I handle things? I know. Yoonjung said slowly. Oh my God, even if you have lost your mind, this is too much. How can you hit our Sasuk? There are some sins that should never be committed. When did he ever follow rules? Yoonjung groaned at the cruel truth which emerged from Jogul's lips. Tears stung his eyes when he thought of what would happen in the morning. What is with this atmosphere? Do you think I would handle this situation poorly? So what did Sasuk say? He asked me to make him stronger. What? Both Yoonjung and Jogul looked at Chung Myung in shock at that unexpected answer. Picking his ears, Chung Myung said, What's there to be surprised about? The two looked at each other. Does this make sense? No. Thinking about it, not a single thing makes sense here anymore. But even Sasuk? We are the Sahyungs. A widow knows how another widow feels. Since they suffered similarly, they could understand how Baekchun felt when he said that. So what did you say? Did you agree? No, I just beat him up. You beat him? Yes. Why? Chung Myung shrugged his shoulders. Does there need to be a reason? To feel relieved. I just beat him until I felt better. At that moment, Yoonjung regretted not training hard before Chung Myung arrived. If he had the chance to return to his past, he was confident that he would train without a moment's rest until the moment Chung Myung appeared. Only then would Yoonjung be capable of smashing Chung Myung in the face at least one time. It was then that Yoonjung realized that there was no way to stop a madman from running amok if that man was powerful. Don't worry about anything and just go to sleep. You'll find out the results once you wake up. Sleep tight. Do you think it's true? There's one thing I realized about Chung Myung. What is it? Even if he speaks bullshit, he never lies. What a great thing to realize. A very great thing, you bastard. But Sahyung, yes? Doesn't this mean that Baekchun Sasuk attacked Chung Myung first? Do you think that's true? He'll speak bullshit, but he doesn't lie. It sounds unbelievable, but even Baekchun Sasuk got beaten. The one who did it was Chung Myung. That sounds convincing. Yoonjong shook his head and looked up at the stairs Chung Myung had used. There was a monster dwelling in the White Plum Blossom boarding house. Where was Mount Hua heading? Mount Hua. Yoonjong wanted to cry. Chapter 88. Yoonjong's eyes narrowed as he looked around. There were none. He couldn't see a single one. Unlike yesterday, he couldn't see any of the second-class disciples that had frequently been tormenting them recently. Was it true? It's not that Yoonjong didn't trust Chung Myung's words. As Joel said, Chung Myung was a person who spoke nonsense but didn't lie. The problem was that Chung Myung's solution was far from the solutions that ordinary people would think of, so he thought that this would cause more trouble. He seems to have solved everything well. He had doubts about how it was solved, but he surely settled the matter. Sahyung, it seems like Chung Myung's words were true, right? Yoonjong nodded at Jogul's words. But was it really plausible for things to be this simple? If we encounter problems with Sasuk, are we supposed to spar and defeat them to solve the problem? Even ignoring common sense, wasn't this abandoning the rules of the sect and coming up with their own way to solve the issue? The problem was that this madman's method actually worked. Just what is going to happen to Mount Hua in the future? Yoonjong never thought of himself as a grumpy figure, but when he saw how Chung Myung behaved, he began to feel like being a grumpy old man wasn't such a bad thing. Wouldn't it be a beautiful world if that grumpy bastard could keep things in order? What are you thinking? I was thinking about the future of Mount Hua and what it feels like to be an old man. Did he finally lose his mind? Yoonjong sighed, noticing how Jogul was looking at him with pitiful eyes. The third-class disciples, who were watching from the side, slowly approached Yoonjong and spoke. The dorms seem a little strange today, Sahyung. I guess so. Why are they doing this? I'm worried that they're going to do something worse. Right. Yoonjong looked up at the distant sky. These kids also aren't in their right minds anymore. To say that their Sasuk was beaten, such a thing would be unimaginable in Mount Hua before Chung Myung arrived. However, like Yoonjong and Jogul, the third-class disciples also seemed to be getting influenced by Chung Myung's unreasonable teachings. If things continued like this, Mount Hua might be filled with people who behave like Chung Myung. Yoonjong shuddered. He didn't want to imagine such a future. Just thinking about it is terrifying. The problem was that it seemed like this thought could very well become a reality. I'm more anxious because it's quiet. Shouldn't we sneak a peek? I don't think those idiots have come to their senses already. Doesn't it seem like they're up to something? Sahyung? Oh my god. Just where did the trust between fellow sect disciples go? It's noisy. Come and get ready for training. Yes. Saje, what is with his temper? Yoonjong sighed deeply as he lamented how his juniors looked at him with that question burning in their eyes. Day by day, Mount Hua was turning away from the Mount Hua Yoonjong once knew. Of course, this change wasn't necessarily bad, but he honestly felt that he didn't want to open his eyes and see the future that Chung Myung would create. Sahyung, then did Chung Myung really beat Baekchun Sasuk? Jogul asked softly so that the others wouldn't overhear, and Yoonjong frowned. What are you even asking for? There's no way he would lie, and if it weren't for that, the seniors would still be harassing us today. No, that... Jogul scratched his head. I just can't understand it. No matter how strong Chung Myung was from the beginning, there's still a difference in the amount of time he and Baekchun Sasuk studied martial arts. Yoonjong couldn't understand either. Does this make any sense at all? It made no sense, but wasn't Chung Myung always doing things that made no sense? Then Sahyung, Chung Myung is stronger than Baekchun, right? Why do you keep asking such obvious... Then what about compared to the Jongnam sect? Yunjong went silent. Compared to them. This was something Yunjong never thought about. Chung Myung shouldn't be inferior to the Jongnam sect either, right? He even defeated Baekchun Sahyong. Yunjong, with a stiff face, fell into thought. Then, in the conference this time, Gul, yes, Sahyong. If Chung Myung wins, will it make a difference? Wouldn't things change? Yunjong shook his head. When a master expert is born in a sect, it's something to celebrate. However, a single master's reputation belongs solely to themselves. They can't do anything alone. The moment that Chung Myung disappears, Mount Hua will fall again like before. If we truly want to revive Mount Hua, we also need to become strong. We can't simply rely on Chung Myung. We won't be able to declare Mount Hua's revival until the day arrives when the world becomes unable to ignore any random disciple within the sect. Right. But as you said, I'm also curious about the conference. This time will be different. What do you mean? Chung Myung. Yunjong took a deep breath and said, will he truly become a hero that brings changes to Mount Hua? Or will he be a tyrant who reigns over this small Mount Hua? Yunjong and Jogul faced each other with serious eyes. Chung Myung. Seriously, get out of here. The two slowly turned their heads towards the sudden interruption. Chung Myung was swearing as he came down. Isn't that Senior Yu? Yu Yisol was chasing after Chung Myung, who was fleeing with his full might. Teach me. I already told you that I had nothing to teach. I told you not to come. You horrible leech. The Yu Maiden Sword. Go to Ungum Sasuk and ask him. He'll teach you. Ungum Sasuk is a man. The Yu Maiden Sword is a technique for women. It is a skill that Ungum Sasuk cannot handle. Then am I a woman? Huh? Am I a woman? Teach me. How do I get through to your mind? Chung Myung and Yu Yisol quickly passed between Yunjong and Jogul. The two, who were left behind, stared in bewilderment at the absurd sight. When did those two become so close? Does Senior Yu always talk this much? It seems that Yusago has spoken more in the past few days than she had in the entire time I've been in the sect. Actually, is it fine for that idiot to talk to Yusago like that? Well, he has always been arrogant. What you said earlier, whether he's a hero or a tyrant. Gul. Yes, Sahyong. Let's go, train. Yes. Baeksang's face crumpled. Sahyong, are you really going to leave it like that? Hearing the dissatisfaction in Baeksang's voice, Baekchun smiled. Why are you so angry? Aren't they acting too arrogantly? Especially that one, Chung Myung. He doesn't even show a shred of remorse. Isn't it alright to punish them now? Punish? You? Him? Someone like you? Huh? Nothing. Baekchun forced himself to smile. Although it had died down a little, his entire body throbbed in pain. Baekchun turned his eyes toward Chung Myung, who was fleeing from Yu Yisol. Sneaky son of a bitch. How could he beat a person so well without leaving any scars on the outside? The more he thought about it, the more absurd this guy seemed. Thankfully, he avoided being embarrassed in front of others, but he couldn't even complain about this injustice to anyone. He'd be treated like a madman if he tried to complain about his junior abusing him without even having any visible injuries. Or maybe he'd be treated as trash with no future prospects. Of course, even if there were wounds on his body, Baekchun would never tell anyone about how he was beaten like a dog. Still, he couldn't help but feel disappointed. Why did you suddenly tell us not to touch your third-class disciples? Baeksang. Yes, Sahyong. I just don't understand the reasoning behind it. The reasoning was to have a happy life. Baekchun was doing it to avoid getting hit again. But Baekchun could never speak his reasons out loud. He had a dignified image to maintain. Isn't the conference approaching? That's right. Baekchun spoke with a stern expression. I was dauntless. Ruling over the third-class disciples is something we can do at any time, but not the conference. Doesn't this event only occur once a year? Baeksang silently nodded. Seeing that Baeksang still wasn't fully satisfied, Baekchun narrowed his eyes. Governing the third-class disciples is an internal task, and the conference is external work which affects the honor of the Mount Hua Sect. The inside is important, but the outside is more urgent. Moreover, considering what happened in the conference last time, let's put aside everything else for now and concentrate on producing positive results. Everything is at stake this time. Don't you think so? Yes. Baek-sang took a deep breath and lowered his head. Sahyung is right. I must have lost focus. I must have been out of my mind. And he was still out of his mind. Regardless, Baek-chun was glad that Baek-sang didn't press the issue any further. Weren't you the one that started this in the first place? Why are you pretending to be some nice guy now? If Baek-sang had decided to ask that question, Baek-chun would have been at a loss for an answer. Thanks for understanding. Let's not worry about the third-class disciples for now. Our first priority is to focus everything we have on the upcoming conference. Ask our sages to reflect on their martial arts and reflect on what they've refined during our closed-door training. Yes, Sahyung. Baek-sang bravely gave a loud response. With that, Baek-chun lowered his head with an expressionless face. Even after the end of the conference, I don't plan on touching those third-class disciples. Baek-chun didn't want to see what would happen to him and his peers. Baek-chun turned to look at Chung Myung off in the distance. We aren't the only ones who will be surprised. Perhaps, even more than Mount Hua, the Jungnam sect would be surprised. When he thought of the future, the pain of being beaten by Chung Myung slowly vanished. Never mind. It didn't vanish. It hurt more. It hurt down to the bone. Damn bastard. Why did you have to hit so thoroughly? Baek-chun sighed and turned away. I just need to do what I can do. Although he felt that life became twisted because of Chung Myung, Baek-chun's purpose to prove himself in the conference hadn't changed. Considering that the Jungnam sect would soon be coming to Mount Hua, he didn't have the time to behave selfishly now. This time, he must prove his worth. But Baek-chun looked back. Why does he keep hanging out with Yu Same? He didn't like it. Baek-chun glanced at them and headed to training while suppressing an uneasy feeling. The conference between Mount Hua and the Jungnam sect was fast approaching. Chapter 89. Sect Leader. Hyunjung silently poured tea into a cup without responding. The fragrant aroma of tea permeated throughout the room. Whenever he felt angry, Hyunjung made tea like this. There was nothing like this tea to stabilize his body and calm his mind. They will arrive today, Sect Leader. Are the preparations complete? Yes, Sect Leader. Nothing will go wrong while welcoming the Jungnam sect. That's good to hear. Hyunjung let out a low sigh. At least this time, I don't have to feel embarrassed. It was shameful to be left behind in martial arts, but what was even more embarrassing was Hyunjung's inability to properly treat the Jungnam sect disciples last time. How would Hyunjung feel if they had no choice but to show the ruined buildings, poor meals, and devastated training halls to Mount Hua's most bitter rival? It was a sensitive issue, especially for Hyunjung, the sect leader of Mount Hua. It wasn't easy to tolerate the piercing gazes of the Jungnam sect disciples who looked at him in mockery and disdain. He had no choice but to bite his lip and endure the ridicule in the past. The more I think about it, the more I believe Chung Myung has done a great job, Eunam said. It was well known that Hyunjung cared deeply for Chung Myung, but Eunam truly understood the heart behind those actions. From Hyunjung and Eunam's perspective, Chung Myung was nothing less than a benefactor who helped seal the leaks on their sinking ship and pulled it up from the depths. This wasn't just about being able to feed people. It was a sect with a long history. At the very least, it should have a dignified appearance which makes its history seem plausible to outsiders. Although appearance is nothing more than empty courtesy, the world still evaluates others based on what could be seen. People would listen to a scholar before they listened to a beggar. Chung Myung not only solved Mount Hua's financial woes, but also restored the sect's face. How could Hyunjung not favor the child? Eunam's smiling gaze made Hyunjung feel slightly embarrassed. He lightly coughed before recommending that Eunam have some tea. Drink. Yes, sect leader. Eunam took a light sip from his cup and nodded quietly. How is it? It seems to have gotten stronger. It's been dried for a long time and the taste seems to have faded a bit. Yes. Hyunjung nodded, pleased with Eunam's analysis. Well-dried plum blossom leaves actually become more fragrant. This is something I only realized after decades of drying plum blossoms. Hyunjung looked at the teacup and spoke. It is the same with Mount Hua. We merely endured. We vowed to recreate the glory of the past, but the reality is that it was difficult to even survive each day. Sect leader. Hyunjung smiled as if to soothe Eunam's worried tone. But we persevered and held on. Finally, this day has come to us. Sometimes the correct answer is to wait rather than move in haste. It was spoken with a strange feeling inside. Eunam looked at Hyunjung with renewed vigor. We aren't the only ones moving forward. Occasionally, sect leaders fall under the illusion that their sect has already gone as far as it can, but a man can evolve until the day they die. Hyunjung, who was walking on the path of a Taoist, would not stop refining himself till the day he stopped breathing. How could one not trust him? Mount Hua Sect leader will bring back the glory of the past. I would like that, but the credit won't go to me even if that happens. It will be a result of the disciples' efforts. How can you say that it's not your credit, sect leader? Eunam. Yes, sect leader. I am a man who understands his own shortcomings. If Mount Hua hadn't collapsed, would I have ever been asked to be the sect leader? If my Sahyungs hadn't left Mount Hua, I would have spent my time studying scriptures. Eunam answered in a serious tone. By leaving Mount Hua, they proved that they were unworthy of being the sect leader. The sect leader is the most decent and honorable person in Mount Hua. Hyunjung smiled without answering. It's a sad story, so the conversation needed to be changed. So what do you think about the second-class disciples? Now that they have finished with their training, they are trying to stabilize their minds and bodies. Eunam's face slightly darkened when the topic shifted to the second-class disciples. Sect leader, say it. Honestly, I feel a bit worried. Worried? Why? With a light sigh, Eunam continued. As I said before, Mount Hua's momentum right now is excellent. But whether or not we lose momentum, doesn't it all come down to the conference's outcome? Do you believe that the second-class disciples will be unable to handle Jungnam disciples? I want to believe in the children, but, as you know, Eunam didn't try to say more. He knew that Hyunjung understood the difference between Mount Hua and the Jungnam sect. Mount Hua was barely surviving through the dark history which haunted them for years, while the Jungnam sect had been shining and advancing in recent times. It was natural for a significant difference to exist between them. No matter how hard the second-class disciples tried, it would be difficult to overcome that gap. Eunam was worried that the disciples who had only just found new hope would once again be captivated by a sense of defeat. How about the third-class disciples? Sorry? Aren't the third-class disciples also going to participate? Are they all well prepared? Eunam was a bit puzzled when Hyunjung suddenly asked about them, but he had no choice except to answer the sect leader. The preparations seemed to be going well. Not overdone, not too much. Eunam only briefly saw the third-class disciples training when he would pass by the training grounds on occasion, so he had no choice but to express his opinion so hazily. Since the children's training was entirely left to Eungom, Eunam didn't feel the need to know or interfere with them and simply thought that they were training normally. They've only recently begun training. Hyunjung nodded quietly. He fully understood Eunam's concerns. Eunam. Yes. What would you do if there was a mountain in front of you? Eunam couldn't easily speak. Suppose that there is a mountain in front of you that you must cross. If there is a path around it, then you could travel that road. If you have time, then you can rest and climb at your own pace. However, what if neither option is available and you need to cross it despite that? I am afraid that I wouldn't be able to overcome that mountain. Even so, you would still gain experience. Next time, wouldn't we be able to cross the mountain more easily? Eunam let out a deep sigh. He didn't feel like everything the sect leader said was convincing, but he couldn't ask any more because the sect leader said it. Hyunjung smiled and spoke when Eunam's worried expression didn't fade. The Mount Hua and Jeonnam Conference is a venue for such exchanges. Yes. It doesn't matter whether we win or lose. What's most important is who can develop further by using it as a stepping stone. What the sect leader said is correct. These guests are coming from far away. Make every effort not to neglect them. I will keep that in mind. Eunam nodded. There will be no problems with Master Huang of the Eunha Guild either. Master Huang? Right. I need to meet with Master Huang once. Isn't the sect leader quite busy? I'm sure he will understand. Right. Thank you. Since the day Master Huang and Eunha came to Mount Hua, they have been pouring funds into the sect. Looking at the scale of investment, it seemed as if they intended to make Huam stand on par with the capital. Won't this cause problems with the Jeonnam sect? Everything will go smoothly. As usual, it will be calm. Eunam bowed his head and stood up. Then, I will go for a final check. You've been through a lot. Please don't mention it. Eunam took a step back. As he quietly closed the door and went outside, Hyunjung looked down at the teacup in front of where Eunam sat. The half-empty teacup had light steam drifting from the surface, seemingly conveying how Eunam felt. Winning isn't important. Hyunjung frowned. Despite being a Taoist, I can lie so casually. Hyunjung was well aware that winning wasn't important, but this conference was a battle that couldn't be won, and he was forced to push his disciples into these unwinnable matches. They couldn't win without a miracle. Unless a miracle happens. Hyunjung suppressed his heavy heart and closed his eyes. It's still such a small place. The disciples of the Jeonnam sect glanced around at Hwaum and spoke with a smirk. Although they had been to this place in the past, this Hwaum village was very small. Compared to Xi'an, where they usually went, this was no better than the empty countryside. Sahyong, did Mount Hua really used to be in the 10 great sects? Of course. But isn't this village too small and shabby for a sect that used to be great? Chung Myung said with a smile. You've got it backwards. This village was only able to form because Mount Hua was here. In the past, Mount Hua was strong enough that this village developed so that the people coming to visit the sect would have somewhere to live. I see. Jung So-han nodded as if he finally understood. But aren't they utterly ruined now? That's true too. Jin Gum-ryung nodded. Jung So-han looked around and opened his mouth. I honestly don't know why this pointless event is being held. What's the point in clashing swords with Mount Hua when the results are obvious? Wouldn't it be better for us to simply swing our swords on our own? This has been decided by the elders. They have their own plans. Be mindful of what you say. Yes, but... Jung So-han slowly turned his head back. Looking at the person following behind him, he smiled. But this time, the conference is quite meaningful. It's worthwhile to take revenge for those who have been disgraced. It was a provocative remark. However, the one receiving the provocation, Lee Song-baek, continued walking in silence. That's no fun. Jung So-han narrowed his eyes. Thanks to Chung Myung's actions at Master Huang's residence, it became common knowledge within the Jeonnam sect that the Eunha Guild had chosen to support Mount Hua over themselves. Of course, despite his actions to repent, Lee Song-baek drew unfavorable gazes for his role in beating Chung Myung and damaging the sect's reputation. There's no reaction. I guess there's no use teasing him. Since that day, Lee Song-baek has changed as a person. He used to be quite serious, but now he is more reticent and stoic. We were disgraced by Mount Hua for the first time in 100 years, so we need to repay this debt, great Sahyung. That's right. While Jin Gumryong and Chung Sohan were walking, Lee Songbek walked along without wanting to get involved in their conversation. His gaze turned towards the towering Mount Hua. Mount Hua. When he visited this place in the past, he felt lighthearted, but now, the shadow of one person overlapping Mount Hua could be seen. We might be walking straight into the tiger's den. Lee Songbek seemed to see the smiling face of Chung Myung. Chapter 90. What the hell? Jung Sohan was annoyed as he spoke with a voice full of anger. Climbing a mountain wasn't an easy task, even for those who learned martial arts. This steep mountain looked like it would even be difficult for a bird to ascend. I don't understand what the hell these people thought when they built their sect in a place like this. No wonder their sect is doomed. Chung Myung would applaud if he could have heard that statement, but Jin Gumryong didn't seem to agree. The sect's location is meaningful. It represents the disciples' desire to sacrifice and leave behind their mundane and materialistic lives while returning to nature. Naturally, they would choose a difficult location for outsiders to enter. What sort of place is Mount Hua? It's only half a sect now. At least if it was the Wudang sect that built this place, it would be understandable. Well, you are right. Those who climbed Mount Hua before must have had a hard time, so they built a place to rest. The disciples of the Jongnam sect were resting there now. One of the second-class disciples opened his mouth with a sullen expression. After going through all this trouble, we should be treated to something amazing. Instead, they're going to feed us grass and make us sleep in ruined rooms. I don't care about the food. I just want to sleep comfortably. Last time, I couldn't even sleep without worrying that the building would collapse on me. Even beggars wouldn't sleep in such a place. What kind of sect is this? This is worse than the Beggars' Union. Dissatisfaction and scorn mixed into the conversation. I think we should stop this useless conference already. We gain nothing from it. We travel so far away to come to Mount Hua and suffer this poor treatment, yet Mount Hua is the only one getting anything good from it. Jin Gumryong just shrugged it off. I know that everyone is dissatisfied with this, but it would be better for you all to calm down. Don't you know how the elders feel about Mount Hua? We don't get it. Why are they so obsessed with a ruined sect? I know. Maybe it's because of their potential. Potential? Someone snorted. If they had potential, they would have already changed. Why would they allow themselves to decline for 100 years if they had some way to reverse the situation? Every sect has its history. What matters is now. While everyone was disparaging Mount Hua, one person spoke up. You best not underestimate Mount Hua too much. Everyone's eyes turned together. It was Lee Songbek. With an expressionless face, he said, If you do, you may end up disgraced. Chung Sohan frowned. Like Sahyong? Despite the obvious provocation, Lee Songbek didn't respond. Don't worry, Sahyong. We won't be boosting Mount Hua's spirits like you did last time. We'll even recover your lost dignity for you, Sahyong. I am just saying that you should remain alert. What could staying alert around Mount Hua even do for us? Lee Songbek was about to say something, but then sighed slowly. Whatever he said wouldn't work. Elder Ki Moksong and Lee Songbek had the most horrible experience because of what Chung Myung had done at the Eunha Guild. In particular, all criticism for the incident had fallen onto Lee Songbek. It wasn't surprising. How could people blame an elder? Do as you please, but if you let your guard down, there will be a price to pay. As Jung So-han frowned and was about to say something, a soft voice came. You aren't wrong. Everyone's head turned again. Everyone stood up when they saw the man slowly ascending the mountain. Sit. Yes. The elder of the Jongnam sect, Sama Sung, looked at everyone once and spoke. Did you all forget what happened with Eunha? When the word Eunha was spoken, Lee Songbek flinched, but the other disciples answered without delay. I haven't forgotten. Sama Sung's eyes shone. Everything was ruined, and we were put to shame because of that collapsing sect. Do you understand how angry the sect leader was? Everyone bowed their heads at his words, not because they did something wrong, but because of the ki releasing from his body. It is enough to be disgraced by Mount Hua once. We must not suffer such a disgrace again. Our Jungnam sect should rise above the world and stand above others. How long do you believe we should waste our time fighting with third-class disciples from Mount Hua? You need to put an end to this atrocious relationship. I will not forgive anyone who suffers disgrace at the hands of Mount Hua, even if it's only due to a moment of carelessness. The Jungnam sect's disciples held their breath while listening to the cold voice of their elder. A general on the battlefield should never have remorse, and a lion should do its best to catch a rabbit. It's not enough to simply defeat Mount Hua. The Jungnam sect must be strong enough to trample Mount Hua without even giving them a chance to stand against us. Do you understand? Yes, elder. The sharp eyes of Sama Sung looked around at the disciples and nodded. However, there's a difference between vigilance and fear, right? Yes. Sama Sung turned and looked at Mount Hua. Get up. Now that you've had a good rest, we should arrive before those waiting for us get tired. Yes. The Jungnam sect's disciples resumed climbing again. After climbing the mountain for a long time, the disciples, who had almost arrived at Mount Hua, began to say, This is hell. We really shouldn't come next time. If it's the same as last time, shouldn't we reach the gate soon? Climbing the steep mountain, they would soon find the ruined sect's gate. Seeing the end of their long journey, the disciples rushed to the top, and they arrived. Huh? What is that? And they were taken aback by the sight in front of them. Surely, when they came here 2 years ago, Mount Hua's gate was old and looked like it would fall apart at any moment. The gate didn't even function as a gate. But now, that old gate wasn't there. They were greeted by a massive door that seemed brand new. Am I seeing things? No way! This makes no sense. Did someone else come up to Mount Hua and establish their sect here? They slowly looked up. The gate may have changed, but the signboard hanging from the entrance showed that the sect's name remained unchanged. However, the old signboard that was previously crumbling had been replaced with a new one that proudly bore the sect's name. When they saw the name Mount Hua in the dragon and snake calligraphy, they felt an unfamiliar pressure fall onto them. What is this? It was well known that the Unha Guild had joined hands with Mount Hua. However, the partnership with Unha was very recent. It was impossible for the sect to rebuild their front gate in such a short amount of time. Not even the Unha Guild could accelerate development so much. This shouldn't be possible. Chung Myung mumbled. Wasn't this sect supposed to be even worse than the Beggars' Union? Was this the same Mount Hua that was ridiculed for being unable to accept disciples even when the sect opened its gates to search? What kind of money did Mount Hua possess to build this gate? Silence. Sama Sung spoke slowly. It seemed like they begged for money somewhere. But even if they can change the gate, the roots of the sect won't change. There's no need to make a fuss out of this. Yes. Don't act like this changes anything. Sama Sung walked towards the gate with a slightly offended expression. It was then. Geek! The huge gate began to open, and a man slowly walked out from inside. It was martial arts head Hyunsang. When he saw the disciples of the Jungnam sect approaching, he looked at them. You must have been through a lot coming all this way, Elder Sama. I met you once before. I am Hyunsang, Elder of Mount Hua. It's Sama Sung. The elder's response was very short. However, Hyunsang didn't show any sign of offense and smiled. Nice to see you again, Elder Sama. The sect leader hasn't come out. Hyunsang's eyes twitched. The sect leader is inside. But your guests have traveled from so far away, and he doesn't even show his face. Hyunsang bit his lip. Sama Sung was an elder of the Jungnam sect. Although he was a well-known elder with high status, he wasn't someone esteemed enough for the sect elder to personally greet. Sama Sung clearly knows that, but asking for the sect leader meant that he was being openly disrespectful of Mount Hua. Let's head in. A banquet has been prepared to welcome the disciples. It might not be enough, but I hope you will forget the long journey you overcame to come here and enjoy it. Banquet? The Mount Hua and Zhongnam Conference isn't about eating and playing. We understand that. Still, it is fine. Take the lead. I need to meet the sect leader. Hyunsang let out a low sigh. My words don't seem to be getting through. The Zhongnam sect acted the same in the past, but it wasn't this extreme. Perhaps this was being done with some purpose in mind. But didn't Hyunjung already warn the elders not to behave recklessly? Remembering these words, Hyunsang choked back his anger and smiled. Come with me. Sama-seung entered with small steps. In the meantime, the newly built gates caught his eye. Looks like they got some support. It seemed like some blind fool threw quite a bit of money into Mount Hua, so the sect used the money to deal with the most urgent issues. The first thing they worked on were things that people could see, like the gates. But the internal buildings couldn't be... What? Those who entered the gate let out a gasp. Training hall? When? They could clearly see that the training halls were all newly rebuilt with blue tiles laid out over the spacious area as they entered the gate. They repaired all of this? No. Was it all new? Did the god of wealth descend on Mount Hua? It's better than the Zhongnam sect. The slight murmur that someone from behind whispered represented the feelings of everyone present. Compared to this, even the Zhongnam sect looked shabby. Just 2 years ago, Mount Hua and everything within were crumbling in ruins. When did such a dramatic change occur? Sama-seung's face contorted as he came to a halt. As the elders stopped walking, Hyunsang looked back and asked, Is something wrong? Doesn't it seem like a lot has changed? Hyunsang smiled and answered, Good things have happened. Does Mount Hua still have someone that supports you? I hope that such a prestigious sect wouldn't resort to fraud or thievery. Instantly, Hyunsang's face burned red with fury. Even if the sect leader had ordered them to maintain peace, this was an intolerable remark. Be careful of what you say. It was then. Fuck you. Do you have a death wish? Everyone's eyes turned to the voice that came from the side. Sama-seung's face went stiff, seeing the scene unfolding in front of him. What is he doing? His eyes caught sight of a series of disciples running like horses. It appears that they had been training for a long time. Their robes were drenched in sweat, and their expressions seemed like they would faint at any moment. Despite that, they continued to press forward with staggering legs. It was a bizarre sight. However, that wasn't where Sama-seung was looking. He stared at the one that interrupted the conversation. Next to the running group stood a person in clean clothes with a calm expression. Unlike the others, he ran with the group as if he was taking a brisk walk. A small child. Sama-seung, who looked at the child, asked in a hoarse voice, What did you say?